She had 812 combat surgeries under her belt, but tonight, no one at Reed Memorial Hospital knew they were working with a ghost. The emergency department at Reed Memorial hummed with the particular chaos of a Tuesday night. Emma Garrett moved through the controlled frenzy with the kind of efficiency that made her invisible. A trauma nurse who asked the right questions, anticipated the right supplies, and somehow always knew which patient was about to crash before the monitors did. She was supposed to be invisible. At 34 years old, Emma had perfected the art of blending into the background. Scrubs that fit like armor, hair pulled back so tightly not a single strand could escape, and a way of speaking that suggested deference without weakness. The other nurses called her reliable. The residents called her helpful. Dr. Marcus Holland, the attending physician who'd run this trauma bay for the last 9 years, called her just a nurse, and he said it in a way that made clear the boundary she was never meant to cross. Martinez, grab bay 3. Holland called out without looking up from his charting. Contusion, nothing critical. Get him stable for floor transfer. Emma nodded and moved without hesitation. This was the rhythm of her life now. Keep your head down, do the work, disappear at the end of the shift. No questions, no expertise, no past. She was checking the monitor on her stable patient when the overhead speaker crackled with the sound that changed everything. Incoming mass casualty. Multiple critical. Convoy attack, 35 minutes from base. 6 patients minimum, penetrating trauma, potential internal injuries. All trauma staff stand by. The emergency department transformed in the span of 3 seconds. The calm dissolved. Phones rang. Nurses moved with purpose. Holland straightened, and Emma watched something shift in his posture. This was what he lived for. This was where he got to be the hero. Garrett, you're with me on Bay 4, Holland announced, his eyes already scanning the incoming assignment board. It's the lowest priority case. Driver side injuries. Nothing life-threatening according to initial report. Keep him monitored. Get vitals every 10 minutes. Don't do anything creative. There it was. The reminder of her place. Emma assigned to the least critical patient, while Holland and the senior residents took the complex cases. It was protocol. It was hierarchy. It was exactly how things worked at Reed Memorial, a military medical center where combat veterans came to heal and surgeons came to prove themselves. She didn't argue. The first ambulances arrived at 2317. Bay 1 filled immediately with a Marine suffering from blast trauma to his lower extremities, both legs compromised, multiple fractures, blood loss already significant. Bay 2 took a soldier with an abdominal wound, metal shrapnel still partially embedded. Bay 3 claimed a young ranger with a chest wound so deep the paramedics had packed it just to keep him alive long enough to reach the hospital. And Bay 4, her bay, received Corporal Jensen. He was 22, fair-haired, with the kind of young face that hadn't yet learned how to hide fear. His left arm hung at an odd angle, fractured shoulder, already splinted, and he had lacerations across his ribs from where the vehicle door had crushed inward during the initial impact. Vitals? Emma asked, already moving into position beside his stretcher. BP 118/76, heart rate 94, respirations 18, O2 sat 97% on room air. The paramedic reported. Conscious and alert. Pain complaint is left shoulder and rib cage. No report of abdominal pain or chest pain. Vitals stable the entire transport. Holland appeared long enough to glance at Jensen's chart, nod approval, and return to Bay 1 where the real work was happening. Emma's hands moved with practiced efficiency. IV access, blood draw for typing and cross, initial wound assessment. Jensen watched her work, trying not to wince as she palpated his ribs. You know what you're doing, Jensen said quietly. It wasn't a question. That's the idea, Emma replied, keeping her voice neutral, her movements professional. You got lucky with that shoulder. Could have been a lot worse. Yeah, that's what everyone says. Lucky. Jensen's eyes were starting to look distant. Everyone else in the convoy got the bad luck. Martinez got blown into tomorrow. Chen's still missing. Webb. He trailed off. Emma's hands stilled for just a fraction of a second. The kind of pause no one else would notice. She was learning to notice pauses in her own breathing, her own heartbeat, the small tells that someone like her couldn't afford to display. We're going to take care of you, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, professional, exactly like a trauma nurse should sound. She ran through the secondary assessment, palpated his abdomen. Soft, no distension, no guarding. Listened to his lungs, both sides clear. Checked capillary refill in his extremities. Everything matched the paramedic report. Stable, low priority. Nothing to see here, except for one thing. When she pressed gently on his right lower quadrant, just below the rib cage, Jensen's breath hitched. Not pain exactly, more like surprise. Like something had shifted inside him that shouldn't have. Emma's hands went still. "Does that hurt?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "No, it's just weird. Like something's floating." She moved her hand and examined him again, watching his face carefully. Holland was too busy with the critical cases. The other nurses were drowning in the chaos of mass casualty protocol. No one would notice what she was about to do. She pressed again, slower this time, methodical, feeling for the specific kind of resistance that meant internal bleeding. The kind of injury that didn't announce itself until the patient was already in hemorrhagic shock. The kind that killed young soldiers in the time it took them to go from stable to dead. Jensen's face paled slightly. "I think you should get me an ultrasound," Emma said, pulling her hands back, standing up, making her voice loud enough to be heard across the bay. "Right now. He's stable," Holland called from Bay 1, not even looking. "I want a fast exam," Emma repeated. Firmer this time, clearer, using language that demanded professional respect. "Corporal Jensen has a mechanism of injury consistent with abdominal trauma, and I'm reading signs of internal bleeding." Holland glanced over, irritation crossing his face. "Martinez, he's your lowest priority case. The paramedics cleared him." "The paramedics didn't palpate this," Emma said, meeting his eyes. "Either we do an ultrasound, or we move him to observation, and we watch him very carefully, but he's not stable. I promise you that." For a moment, Holland looked like he was going to argue. Emma watched him calculate. A nurse versus his own judgment. A potential lawsuit versus the hassle of protocol violation. The scales balanced and tilted toward caution. "Get the cart," he said finally. "But if it comes back negative, I need to know that you understand protocol exists for a reason." 2 minutes later, the ultrasound tech positioned the probe over Jensen's abdomen. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. A dark pocket of fluid gathering near his spleen, blood pooling in a space where it shouldn't be. The kind of finding that meant internal bleeding that was slow right now, but would become catastrophic fast. "We're taking him to surgery," Emma announced. And this time no one questioned her. As they rushed Jensen's stretcher toward the elevators, Holland caught up to her in the hallway. His expression had shifted from irritation to something more complex. Suspicion mixed with professional respect. The way someone looks when they've just realized they don't fully understand the person standing next to them. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. Emma pressed the elevator button. The door slid open. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and revealed nothing. "That's what we do," she said. "We save people." The doors closed, taking Jensen toward the operating room, toward skilled surgeons, toward the surgery that would stop the bleeding and give him a future. Emma stood in that hallway for just a moment, letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. For 2 years, she'd been invisible. For 2 years, she'd been just a nurse at a military hospital, keeping her head down, using just enough skill to be competent, but not enough to draw attention. For 2 years, she'd been running from the title that had defined her: Captain, Special Operations Combat Surgeon, the woman the Army had declared dead in Kandahar province. One perfect clinical catch, and everything was starting to unravel. If you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when Captain Emma's story continues. And before we go any further, I have to ask, where are you watching this from? Are you at home? In the car? At work? Let me know in the comments where you're listening to Emma's story right now, because I want to know who's hearing her truth for the first time. The surgical floor of Reed Memorial was a different world from the trauma bay. Cleaner, quieter, more controlled. Emma watched from the observation gallery above operating room 2 as Dr. Holland and a surgical resident worked on Corporal Jensen's spleen. She wasn't supposed to be here. Nurses didn't observe surgeries unless they were part of the surgical team. But Holland had called her up before scrubbing in. A strange request that suggested he wanted to understand something. What he wanted to understand was how she knew. The surgery proceeded methodically. Holland made the incision. Assessed the damage. The spleen was bleeding, but salvageable. He began the repair work. Careful movements. Textbook technique. Emma watched his hands, measuring his skill against what she'd already seen in Jensen's physical exam. He was good. Competent. Professional. He wasn't fast enough. Jensen's blood pressure on the monitor dipped slightly. Barely noticeable. Holland didn't seem to notice. But Emma did. She recognized the pattern. The specific way the numbers dropped suggested the bleeding was slightly worse than Holland's assessment had indicated. The clamp he'd placed wasn't quite in the optimal position. She watched him work for another 3 minutes. The pressure dropped further. 118 to 116. 116 to 114. Small steps toward hemorrhagic shock. Then Holland seemed to catch it. His movements became more decisive. He adjusted his approach, repositioned his work, and suddenly the bleeding was controlled. The pressure stabilized. Jensen's spleen was saved. When Holland emerged from the OR 30 minutes later, he found Emma waiting in the scrub room. "You were watching," he said. "Not a question. The observation gallery is open." Emma replied carefully. "That's not what I mean." Holland began removing his surgical gloves with deliberate precision. During the procedure, the patient's vitals started to decline. You would have noticed that from up there. Most nurses don't know what to look for. But you watched me miss it at first, and you knew I had it wrong. Emma kept her face neutral. In the corner of her mind, a sound she hadn't heard in 2 years, the distant percussion of rotor blades. Helicopter. Medevac incoming. She blinked it away. "I've worked trauma for a long time," she said simply. "Pattern recognition. That's not pattern recognition. That's knowing things a trauma nurse shouldn't know." Holland's eyes were sharp now, clinical. "Where did you train?" "Community hospital. Before that, work experience in the military medical system." It wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete. Emma had learned to weaponize incomplete truth. Holland studied her for a moment longer, then shook his head. "Well, whatever your background is, you probably saved Jensen's life tonight. He would have coded in about 10 more minutes if we hadn't caught that bleeding pattern. So, thank you." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Emma standing in the scrub room with hands that were steady and a heartbeat that wasn't. 2 floors below the surgical suite, in a small office cluttered with files and outdated computer monitors, Hospital Administrator Patricia Monroe was having a problem. She'd worked at Reed Memorial for 17 years, and she'd learned to read personnel files like some people read faces. You could tell a lot about someone by their employment history, where they came from, who trusted them, where they fit in the broader story of American medical infrastructure. Emma Garrett's file told her almost nothing. The resume was perfect. Too perfect. Nursing degree from a state university. Boards passed on first attempt. Clinical experience listed as Military Medical System Support, 2022-2023. References from the Department of Defense. All of them verified, all of them professional, all of them remarkably sparse on actual details. And the employment history gap. 18 months ago, Emma simply appeared in the hospital system. No previous civilian nursing position. No prior address history. No social media footprint. No family listed as emergency contact. Monroe had been through enough hiring paperwork to know what a carefully constructed false identity looked like. This was one of them. But Reed Memorial was a military hospital. False identities sometimes had reasons. Sometimes they had clearances. Sometimes they had stories that weren't supposed to be told. She made a note in the file and set it aside. Not her problem. Not yet. The emergency department received its second critical patient at 3:47 hours. Captain Bradley Ross, age 38, blast injury to facial structure, the paramedic reported quickly. IED strike approximately 90 minutes ago during base patrol exercise. Facial trauma with possible mandible fracture, lacerations across face and neck, some requiring sutures, Possible orbital damage to right eye. Ross was conscious and alert, which was good. His left eye was swelling shut. His right side of his face was a landscape of lacerations and blood. He looked, in every objective way, like a man who'd just experienced significant trauma. Emma assigned him to Bay 6 and began the intake assessment. Vitals stable, consciousness clear. She started the process of gentle wound cleaning, preparing him for a more detailed examination by one of the residents. But when her hands were close to his face, working carefully around the injuries, Ross's good eye, the left one, locked onto her with the kind of intensity that suggested recognition of something fundamental. "Do I know you?" he asked quietly. His voice was rough from pain medication, but there was something underneath it. Memory. Searching. "I'm Nurse Garrett," Emma replied, keeping her voice professional, neutral, exactly what a nurse should sound like. "You're going to need some stitches, but the good news is, your eye looks like it's going to be fine." "No, Ross trailed off, his good eye still searching her face. "That's not... You look like someone I knew a long time ago. Someone who's supposed to be dead." Emma's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second. Exactly the pause she'd promised herself she'd never let happen. "I'll get the resident to check your orbital damage," she said, standing up, turning away, but not quite fast enough. Ross watched her go, and his eye tracked her across the bay until she disappeared into the nurse's station. He turned his head slightly, wincing at the pain, and looked toward the nurse beside him, a young woman named Sarah who was charting his vitals. "That nurse," he said quietly. "The one who was just working on me. Do you know her name?" "Emma Garrett," Sarah said, already turning to other tasks. "She's one of our best." "Emma Garrett," Ross repeated, testing the name. Then he pulled out his phone, carefully, because moving hurt, and scrolled through his photos. He'd kept them for 8 years. Photographs from deployment, from his unit, from the field hospital in Kandahar, where the impossible happened every day, and someone kept making it possible. He found the photograph he was looking for, a medical tent, soldiers on stretchers, surgical equipment hastily arranged on a makeshift table. And in the center, a woman in blood-stained surgical scrubs, her hair pulled back, her hands moving with focused precision, surrounded by men and women she was fighting to keep alive. The caption underneath, partially visible, 2016 FOB Salerno Medical Operations. In the photograph, the woman wore a name tape on her scrubs. Hayes. Ross looked from the photograph to the bay where Emma had just disappeared. "That's not possible," he whispered. Holland found Emma in the break room at 0512 hours, just as the night shift was transitioning to morning, and the world outside was still dark. "We need to talk about your qualifications," he said without preamble. Emma was standing at the small counter, pouring coffee into a cup that read, "Nurses do it with patience." She didn't turn around. "My credentials are on file," she said. "Your credentials are incomplete." Holland stepped inside the break room and closed the door. "During Jensen's surgery, I was thinking about how you assessed him. The way you knew exactly where the bleeding was coming from before we even had imaging. The way you knew the injury pattern. Those are things combat surgeons know, Emma. Things trauma nurses don't know unless they've worked in very specific environments." Emma turned to face him. Her expression was carefully neutral, the face of someone who'd spent 2 years practicing not showing anything. "Are you asking me to leave?" she asked quietly. "I'm asking where you learned to read a patient like you read them." Holland stepped closer. "I've trained dozens of residents. I've worked with nurses from every major trauma center in the country. I've never seen someone with your skills hide behind a nursing title. So either you're the most naturally talented nurse in the military medical system, or you're something else. And I want to know which one." The fluorescent lights hummed. The coffee maker gurgled. Emma could hear the distant sounds of the hospital waking up. Morning shift staff arriving. Overnight patients being transitioned. The slow machinery of a medical center returning to daylight operations. "I'm a trauma nurse," Emma said. "That's all I need to be. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have for you." Holland studied her face for a long moment. Emma watched him calculate. whether to push, whether to report this to administration, whether to let it go and pretend he hadn't noticed the impossible skill set standing in front of him. "Jensen's going to be fine," Holland said finally. "The spleen is salvageable. He'll recover fully. You did that. Not me. You. I did my job. You did someone else's job. Someone much more qualified than a trauma nurse." Holland turned toward the door, then paused. "When you're ready to tell me who you really are, I'm ready to listen. But understand this. People like you don't just appear in the system by accident, and they don't disappear into nursing roles unless they're running from something." He left her standing in the break room with cooling coffee and the terrible realization that her careful disguise was unraveling faster than she'd anticipated. By the time she returned to the emergency department, Captain Bradley Ross had been transferred to a recovery room on the surgical floor. But not before he'd made a phone call that would set the next cascade of events in motion. And somewhere in the building, in a small office on the administrative floor, Patricia Monroe was making a decision about what to do with a file that contained too many blanks and a woman who didn't quite add up. The invisible expert's invisibility, it seemed, had an expiration date. Captain Bradley Ross didn't sleep. He told himself it was the pain medication, the IV in his arm, the way hospital rooms never got truly dark. But the real reason was the photograph on his phone screen, and the woman who wasn't supposed to exist. His recovery room was on the surgical floor, quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the occasional footstep in the hallway. Ross lay in the darkness with the phone propped on his chest, comparing images again and again. The military database photo from 2016, Operation Enduring Freedom, Kandahar Province, Forward Operating Base, and the personnel file photograph from Reed Memorial's intranet, pulled up through a contact he still had in the intelligence division. Same bone structure, same dark eyes, same way of standing that suggested someone who'd been trained to think tactically, even in stillness. But it was the scar that convinced him. On her left hand, just above the wrist, a thin line that ran diagonally across her palm. Ross remembered the story behind that scar. A ranger named Michaels had been bleeding out in the field hospital tent, his femoral artery severed. The captain, Hayes, her name was Hayes, had been operating on 2 other soldiers simultaneously. She'd reached across Michaels with her bare hand to apply direct pressure, and his panicked movement had opened a laceration in her palm that required 7 stitches. She'd finished both surgeries before allowing anyone to treat her own wound. Ross pulled up the new photograph again. Zoomed in on the left hand visible in the frame as Emma Garrett stood at the nurse's station this morning. The scar was there. Older now, faded, but unmistakably the same. His hands trembled as he reached for the phone to make a call. 3 floors down, Emma was learning something she'd forgotten in 2 years of trying to forget everything. The patient in Bay 2 was a young soldier, no more than 23, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen things that didn't fit into normal human consciousness. His name was Private Marcus Chen, and he'd been admitted with acute anxiety and hyperventilation, following a training exercise that had triggered his PTSD response. Most trauma nurses would follow protocol: oxygen, monitoring, calm reassurance. Emma did all of that. But she did something else, too. She sat beside his stretcher and spoke to him in a voice that came from somewhere deeper than medical training. "Where were you when it happened?" she asked quietly. Chen's eyes focused on her. "Helmand Province, 2017. We were doing checkpoint security and the building in front of us just exploded. IED. My spotter, he couldn't finish the sentence." Emma nodded like she understood, because she did. "You survived," Emma said. "That means something. It means you're stronger than what tried to kill you. And it means the people who didn't survive would want you to keep going." Chen looked at her with something like recognition. "How do you know that? How do you know what it's like?" Emma's hands stilled on the monitor controls. In her peripheral vision, she could see other staff members moving through the bay. Normal operations, normal morning. Nothing unusual about a nurse talking to a patient. "Because I've been there," she said quietly. "And the only thing that got me through was remembering that I owed it to the people I couldn't save to keep doing the work, to keep saving the ones I could." Chen's breathing began to slow. His hyperventilation settled, and for the first time since admission, his eyes held something other than panic. They held recognition of something shared, something understood by someone who wasn't going to pretend to know more than she did. Emma stayed with him for another 5 minutes, then moved to her next patient. But her mind was already calculating probabilities, and the numbers weren't good. Denise Park found her in the medication room at 8:47 hours. Denise had worked with Emma for 18 months, and in that time they'd developed the kind of friendship that existed in the spaces between shifts. Quick conversations during breaks, occasional text messages about staffing problems, the slow building of mutual respect that came from working side by side through crises. Denise was good at reading people. It was a survival skill for nurses. And right now, Denise could see that Emma was terrified. "What happened?" Denise asked, closing the medication room door behind her. "Nothing happened," Emma said, not looking up from the medication she was organizing with mechanical precision. "You've been here for 18 months," Denise said quietly. "In all that time, I've never seen you scared. I'm seeing it now, so something happened, and you're about to run." Emma's hand stilled. The bottles of medication lined up like soldiers at attention. "I can't talk about this," Emma said finally. "You don't have to talk about it, but you need to know that whatever it is, running never works. Running just means you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Denise stepped closer. "I don't know who you really are. I don't need to know. But I know you're a good person, and good people don't just disappear. So whatever this is, maybe you need to stop running and start fighting." Emma turned to face her friend. In her eyes was the weight of 2 years of hiding, of careful lies, of pretending to be less than what she was. And underneath that was something else. Fear that Denise was right. That running had never actually solved anything. "If you knew the truth," Emma said quietly, "you'd have to make choices about what to do with it. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering." Denise reached out and squeezed Emma's shoulder. "Whatever happens next, you don't do it alone." Before Emma could respond, the medication room phone buzzed with an incoming message. Emma checked it, and her face went pale. The message was from hospital security. "Request you call Military Intelligence Liaison Office, extension 4521, urgent." At 09:01 hours, Captain Bradley Ross sat up in his recovery bed with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking to Colonel Thomas Bradford from the Army Intelligence Division. "I'm telling you, she's alive," Ross said, pain edging his voice despite the medication. "I served with her in Kandahar. I'd recognize her anywhere. She saved my life. She saved a lot of lives. But the records say she's dead. KIA during a mortar attack in 2016. Except she's not dead. She's working as a trauma nurse here at Reed Memorial under the name Emma Garrett." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Bradford's voice, careful and controlled. "You're sure about this?" "Absolutely sure." "Captain Miranda Hayes, Special Operations Combat Medic. I have photographic confirmation and physical identification markers. She has a scar on her left hand from an incident in the field hospital. Same scar. Same everything." Another pause. "Stand by. Do not discuss this with anyone else." The line went dead. Emma was moving toward the nurse's station when she heard the emergency alert tone on the hospital PA system. Not a code blue, not a mass casualty. Something else. Something official. "Attention all personnel," the administrative voice announced. "Military Intelligence Liaison Office requesting meeting with nursing staff. Conference room C, 15 minutes. Administrative personnel and department heads mandatory." Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She looked toward the elevators, calculating distances. Stairs were 15 seconds away. Her car was in the staff parking lot. She had maybe 5 minutes before someone would figure out her assignment and come looking for her specifically. She was already moving when Denise caught her arm. "Don't," Denise said quietly. "Don't run. You don't understand," Emma whispered. "Then make me understand, but do it without running away." Emma looked at her friend's face, young, earnest, convinced that problems could be solved by facing them. Emma wanted to believe in that. She wanted to believe that the woman she'd been before Kandahar could still exist in the world. But she'd spent 2 years learning that some ghosts, once awakened, couldn't be put back to sleep. "If I'm not at the conference in 10 minutes, Emma said quietly, "tell them I'm in the trauma bay. Tell them you didn't see me leave." Then she pulled her arm free and walked toward the stairwell, moving with the kind of casual professionalism that made her invisible. The invisible expert, disappearing one last time. But as she reached the door to the stairs, she heard something that stopped her cold. A voice from the overhead speaker system, calm and official. "Emma Garrett, please report to hospital administration. Emma Garrett, please report to hospital administration immediately." The second time her name was called, everyone would know to look for her. She had maybe 45 seconds. Emma stopped in the stairwell, her hand on the railing, and made a choice. She could keep running. She could disappear from Reed Memorial, like she disappeared from the army 2 years ago. She could start over somewhere else with a different name and a different story. Or she could stop running and find out if the woman she'd been could ever exist in the world again. After a long moment, she turned around and walked back toward the elevators, toward the administrative floor, toward the meeting that would unravel everything. Captain Miranda Hayes, the ghost of Kandahar, was about to stop being invisible. The surgical waiting room at Reed Memorial existed in a state of perpetual limbo. Families sat in uncomfortable chairs, counting minutes like they counted heartbeats, aware that every second mattered, that time was the currency of life and death, and they had no control over how it was being spent. Emma stood in the observation gallery above Operating Room 1, watching Dr. Holland prepare for a procedure that would either solidify her carefully constructed life or destroy it completely. The patient was Army Ranger Michael Torres, 26 years old. Blast injury from an IED that had embedded shrapnel dangerously close to his heart. The fragments were still lodged there, each one a potential catastrophe, each one a reason to proceed with absolute precision. Holland was the best trauma surgeon Reed Memorial had. Emma knew his skill level. She'd watched him work. But she also knew something Holland didn't: the specific anatomy of cardiac shrapnel wounds, because she'd treated 17 of them in Kandahar province. 17 soldiers with metal embedded near their hearts. 14 of them had lived because she'd understood the geometry of blast injuries in ways civilian surgeons never needed to learn. The scrub nurse looked up at Emma standing in the gallery. "You coming down to assist?" Emma nodded. She couldn't say no. If she said no, it would be noticed. If she stayed away, it would be suspicious. So she walked downstairs, changed into surgical attire, and entered the OR, as if she were just another trauma nurse helping with a routine procedure. She wasn't routine, and Holland already knew it. The surgery began at 09:45 hours. Holland made the initial incision with controlled precision, exposed the pericardium, carefully opened the membrane surrounding the heart. Torres's heart kept beating, a steady percussion of life persisting despite the violence that had been done to it. Emma positioned herself at Holland's left, ready to provide suction, instruments, whatever assistance was needed. But as Holland began to work on the first piece of shrapnel, Emma's mind was somewhere else entirely. Kandahar Province, March 2016. The field hospital tent where she'd operated on 7 casualties simultaneously, while the sound of incoming mortar fire echoed through the compound. The patient on her table had shrapnel embedded in his right ventricle. The young ranger was 19. His name was Michaels. He was bleeding out faster than they could replace the blood. Emma's hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this 17 times before this deployment, who understood the specific geometry of blast injuries, who knew that one wrong movement would send shrapnel through living tissue and end everything. Around her, other soldiers screamed. Other medics worked. Other lives hung in balance. But in the moment, there was only Michaels and the shrapnel, and her hands, and the choice between saving him or moving to the next patient. She saved him. But 6 minutes later, when the second mortar hit the tent, Michaels was one of the 3 soldiers she couldn't save in the aftermath. Martinez. Holland's voice pulled Emma back to the present. Operating Room 1. Torres's exposed heart beating steadily on the surgical table. Holland's hands positioned around a fragment of shrapnel that was exactly 4 millimeters from the right coronary artery. "I need to approach this from a different angle," Holland said, frustration edging his voice. "But if I rotate the exposure, the scar tissue from the blast will tear and will lose visibility. Emma watched Holland reconsider his approach, watched him think through the geometry of the wound, watched him calculate and recalculate and come up short. "You need to access from the posterior approach," Emma heard herself say, her voice steady, her clinical mind taking over where her emotional mind was drowning in Kandahar. "Use minimal retraction on the pericardium. Work along the inferior vena cava instead of the anterior wall. The scar tissue won't tear if you approach from below." The surgical team went still. Holland looked at her with an expression that mixed confusion and understanding in equal measure. "That's not standard cardiothoracic approach." "No," Emma agreed quietly. "It's combat cardiothoracic approach. When you're working in a field hospital with limited equipment and a patient who's already been through a blast, you adapt. You work around obstacles instead of through them." Holland studied the wound. Then he studied Emma's face. The calculation happening behind his eyes was the same one Dr. Chen had done in the hallway the day before. The realization that something didn't add up. That expertise this specific didn't come from normal trauma nursing. That the woman standing beside him was something other than what her credentials suggested. "Show me," Holland said finally. For the next 16 minutes, Emma walked Holland through a surgical approach that belonged to her past, to the person she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. She guided him through the inferior vena cava approach. She helped him position the retraction to avoid damaging the scar tissue. She positioned the clamp with absolute precision to isolate the artery while minimizing vascular compromise. Together, they removed the shrapnel. Together, they repaired the minor laceration that had resulted from the blast. Together, they brought Torres's heart back to its normal rhythm, and his blood pressure back to safe levels. When it was finished, Holland stepped back from the table and looked at Emma. "What you just did," Holland said quietly, "that was advanced combat trauma surgery. Not nursing assistance. Surgery." Emma said nothing. Her hands were shaking now, just slightly, the delayed response of adrenaline finally catching up to her nervous system. Holland's next words were interrupted by the surgical tech's radio crackling to life. "Dr. Holland, message from hospital security. FBI agents are currently en route to Reed Memorial. ETA approximately 40 minutes. They're requesting access to personnel records and staff interviews." The surgical team exchanged glances. Holland's expression shifted from shock to something approaching understanding. "We're finishing this case," he said quietly. "Then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about who you actually are." Emma nodded. She already knew what that conversation would reveal. In 40 minutes, the FBI would arrive. In 45 minutes, her identity would be confirmed. In 50 minutes, everything would change. 2 years of hiding. 2 years of being invisible. 2 years of running from Captain Miranda Hayes. All of it ending in an operating room, with blood on her hands and a surgeon looking at her like she was a ghost made flesh. At 10:17 hours, Patricia Monroe's secretary called down to the surgical floor. "Tell Nurse Garrett to report to hospital administration. Ms. Monroe wants to see her immediately." The message was relayed through the OR phone. Holland heard it. The surgical team heard it. And Emma, standing at the surgical sink washing blood from her hands, heard the words that meant her time was up. She took her time drying her hands. She took her time changing out of surgical attire. She moved through the hospital corridors with the same invisible efficiency that had defined her for 18 months. Just a nurse, unremarkable, easily forgotten. But as she passed through the ER toward the administrative stairs, she saw them. Corporal Jensen in Bay 3, talking to his wife, alive because Emma had recognized a pattern of internal bleeding. Private Chen in Bay 4, breathing steady, no longer in crisis, alive because Emma had understood what it meant to survive something that tried to kill you. Captain Ross in the ICU recovery room, his facial wounds healing, alive because Emma had saved him in Kandahar and saved him again here in the present. All of these lives. All of these moments of survival. All of them attached to the woman named Emma Garrett, who didn't actually exist. Patricia Monroe was waiting in her office when Emma arrived. The administrator sat behind a desk that seemed far too small for the weight of what she was about to say. "Please sit down," Monroe said quietly. Emma remained standing. "Your personnel file," Monroe continued, opening a folder. contains some significant discrepancies. Military medical system background with no specific institutional affiliation. References that verify your competence, but provide almost no personal history. An employment gap of 18 months prior to joining our facility. And now, approximately 40 minutes ago, a request from Army Intelligence Division asking specifically about an individual matching your physical description. Monroe looked up from the folder. Her eyes were kind but professional, the look of someone who'd seen enough personnel problems to know when someone was deeply, fundamentally hiding something. "I want to give you the opportunity to tell me who you are," Monroe said, "before the FBI arrives. Professional courtesy, if you will. But I need you to know that whether you tell me or they tell me, your history at Reed Memorial is over as of this moment." Emma's hands were steady. Her voice was steady. But inside her, something that had been held together by careful lies and determined forgetting was beginning to crack. "My name is Miranda Hayes," she said quietly. "I was a captain in Special Operations Command. I was medically discharged 2 years ago. I've been working here under an assumed name, trying to leave my past behind." Monroe nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," Emma said, looking toward the window where she could see the distant gates of Reed Memorial, where in approximately 35 minutes, 2 FBI agents would drive through those gates and ask her questions she'd been running from for 2 years. "Now I stop running." The FBI agents arrived at 10:52 hours. Emma watched them through the office window as they passed through the main entrance of Reed Memorial. 2 of them. The first was a woman in her mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a charcoal suit that suggested function over fashion. The second was younger, maybe 30, with the rigid posture of someone still new enough to the job that professionalism was something he performed rather than inhabited. They moved through the hospital with the particular confidence of federal agents, people accustomed to institutional deference, accustomed to authority, accustomed to having their questions answered. Patricia Monroe stood when they entered her office. Emma remained in the chair where she'd been sitting for the last 37 minutes, staring at nothing in particular, waiting for the moment that would permanently redefine her life. "Special Agent Rachel Torres," the woman said, extending her hand to Monroe. "This is Special Agent David Kim. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterintelligence Division. Thank you for accommodating our visit on short notice." Monroe shook their hands and gestured to the chairs across from her desk. Torres sat with the ease of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. Kim remained standing, a position that suggested he was the junior agent, and still learning where to position himself in these situations. "This is Emma Garrett," Monroe said, gesturing to Emma. "Our trauma nurse. She's been here for 18 months with an exemplary record." Torres turned to face Emma directly. Her eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky, and they held the particular intensity of someone trained to read people like books left open on tables. "Ms. Garrett," Torres said. "Or should I say Captain Hayes?" Emma said nothing. "Your silence suggests acknowledgement," Torres continued, pulling out a tablet. "Let me walk you through what we have." Facial recognition software flagged an individual at Reed Memorial matching the biometric profile of Captain Miranda Hayes, Special Operations Command, Special Forces Combat Surgeon. The flagging occurred during routine security surveillance of federal medical facilities. Captain Hayes was officially declared KIA, killed in action, in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, on March 14, 2016. Torres tapped the tablet, and an image appeared on the screen. Emma's military photograph. Younger, harder. The woman she'd been before, everything fell apart. "Your fingerprints," Torres continued. "From your nursing license application, match military biometric database records associated with Captain Miranda Hayes. Your employment history prior to 18 months ago contains significant gaps. Your references are verified but sparse. Your identity documentation is legally sound but was apparently created using your mother's maiden name as your surname." Kim stepped forward and placed several documents on Monroe's desk. Personnel files, biometric data, military records, partially redacted. "So here's the situation," Torres said, her voice calm but clinical. "You're officially deceased. Dead people can't legally work in federal medical facilities. Dead people can't hold nursing licenses. Dead people can't practice medicine in any capacity, which means you've been committing multiple felonies just by showing up to work every morning for the last 18 months. Emma finally looked at Torres directly. Am I under arrest? That depends, Torres said, on whether you cooperate. We're not here to prosecute you for identity fraud. We're here to understand why Captain Hayes, one of the most decorated combat surgeons in special operations history, decided to disappear and resurface as a trauma nurse in a military hospital using a false identity. I wanted to forget, Emma said quietly. I wanted to stop being a soldier. I wanted to stop being the person everyone called a hero when I felt like I'd failed everyone who mattered. Kim exchanged a glance with Torres. Torres leaned back in her chair, studying Emma with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was recalibrating her assessment in real time. Captain Hayes died in Kandahar, Emma continued, her voice steadier now, in a field hospital attack that killed 8 medical personnel and 14 patients. I was the only surgeon who survived. I performed emergency procedures on 17 soldiers that day. I saved 9 of them. I lost 8. When the Army offered me a medal and sent me home, I couldn't accept recognition for choosing who lived and who died, based on what uniform they were wearing. So you faked your death, Kim said. It wasn't a question. I requested medical discharge on grounds of psychological trauma. The paperwork was incomplete. I left the military system and tried to disappear. Torres sat forward again. And now you're working in a military hospital saving lives again. Which suggests either you never actually wanted to stop, or you were running towards something instead of running from it. Emma didn't answer. Torres seemed satisfied with that. Here's what we know, Torres said, her tone shifting to something more grave. 3 soldiers you operated on before your deployment ended in Kandahar have died in the last 6 months. All 3 were veterans with combat trauma histories. All 3 deaths occurred under circumstances that appeared accidental on the surface. But when we cross-referenced them with your service record and your connection to a classified mission in Kandahar province, military intelligence began to suspect something more sinister. Emma's hands, which had been steady until that moment, began to shake. Targeted killings, Torres continued. Someone systematically eliminating soldiers who were present during a specific classified operation. We don't have complete information on that operation. It's above my clearance level. But we have enough to know that you were central to it. And we have enough to know that 3 soldiers connected to that operation are now dead. Who? Emma whispered. Torres consulted her tablet. Sergeant Daniel Cross, killed in a car accident in Colorado. Captain James Mitchell, suicide by overdose in Texas. And as of 48 hours ago, Corporal Stephen Reeves, apparent fall from a construction site in Seattle. Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping backward. She walked to the window and stared out at the hospital grounds, at the military vehicles in the parking lot, at the world she'd been trying so desperately to hide from. They know where I am, she said quietly. Possibly, Torres agreed. Which is why we're here. Which is why you need to cooperate. And which is why, as of this moment, you're going into protective custody. Emma turned back to face the agents. My patients. Your patients will be transferred to other staff, Monroe said. This is non-negotiable. There's more, Kim added. We need information about the classified mission. Everything you remember. Every detail that might explain why someone would target soldiers who served with you in Kandahar province. Emma looked at Torres. And if I cooperate, then we keep you alive, Torres said simply. And we figure out who's hunting you before they find you. Outside Monroe's office, in the hallway just beyond the closed door, Denise Park stood frozen, her hand still raised where she'd been about to knock, before Torres's words had stopped her cold. She'd come to ask Emma about her shift assignment for the next week. Instead, she'd learned that her friend wasn't actually her friend. That Emma Garrett didn't exist. That somewhere in the classified past of a woman named Captain Miranda Hayes, soldiers were dying. And that the woman Denise had grown to care for was about to disappear again, this time into federal custody. The interrogation room at Reed Memorial's basement security office was painted institutional gray. No windows, 1 metal table, 3 chairs. Emma sat in one of them, while Torres and Kim positioned themselves across from her, a tablet between them displaying classified documents with redacted portions that suggested secrets bigger than any single person. March 2016, Torres said, sliding the tablet toward Emma. Forward Operating Base Chapman, Kandahar Province. You performed emergency surgical intervention on a high-value detainee, a Taliban commander named Fahim Hadari, age 43, wanted in connection with multiple attacks on coalition forces, captured during a raid. And then, because of specific operational orders, you saved his life. Emma's jaw tightened. She knew exactly where this was going. The file is mostly redacted, Torres continued, but what we have indicates Hadari was valuable for intelligence gathering. CIA wanted him alive. So when he arrived at the field hospital with severe abdominal injuries from the raid, you were ordered to operate. And you did. Despite knowing exactly who he was, despite knowing what he'd done, you put your hands inside a Taliban commander's abdomen and kept him alive. Following orders, Emma said quietly. Following orders, Kim echoed. Orders that apparently came from above your pay grade. Orders that came from intelligence leadership. Orders that required a surgeon willing to make that particular moral compromise. Torres leaned forward. Hadari was transferred to CIA custody after your surgery. He spent 4 months in a black site detention facility providing intelligence on Taliban operations, al-Qaeda movements, financial networks. He was valuable. He was also dangerous. And 6 months ago, he escaped. Emma's hands went flat on the metal table. Still. Controlled. But inside, her mind was recalibrating everything she'd believed about her past. The escape happened in Islamabad, Torres continued. CIA safe house. The details are classified, but the result is clear. Hadari disappeared, and then, coincidentally, soldiers who served with you in Kandahar began dying. You said 3, Emma said. Cross, Mitchell, and Reeves. 3 confirmed, Kim corrected. 2 missing, Sergeant David Morrison and Private Joshua Chen. Both served in your unit. Both disappeared 7 weeks ago from a civilian population center in Afghanistan. Both presumed deceased based on intelligence chatter. Emma felt something crack inside her chest. Morrison she remembered specifically. He'd been in the surgical tent during the attack that ended her career. He'd held retractors while she operated. He'd watched her make impossible choices. Hadari has been systematically eliminating everyone involved in his capture, Torres said. The intelligence officers, the tactical team leaders, the medical personnel. You're next on his list, Captain. Not because you're a soldier, you're not anymore, but because you're the one who kept him alive. Because you're the symbol of the operation that humiliated him. Because, in the minds of his network, you're responsible for everything that followed. There's something else, Kim added, pulling out another file. 2 days ago, Hadari was spotted in Northern Virginia. Immigration records show he entered the country illegally, approximately 8 weeks ago using forged documentation. Current location unknown. But his known associates have been conducting surveillance on Reed Memorial. Emma stood abruptly. The chair scraped backward. We need to evacuate the hospital. We need you in protective custody, Torres said firmly. That's the priority. My patients will be protected as a secondary concern, Torres interrupted. Your life is the immediate threat, which means you come with us, right now. Federal safe house, armed protection, full security protocols. Emma walked to the corner of the gray room and stared at the wall, calculating probabilities. Hadari in country. Hadari hunting her. Hadari having already killed 5 soldiers from her unit. The pattern was clear, the trajectory was obvious, and the ending was inevitable, unless she disappeared again. No, Emma said, turning back to face Torres. Excuse me? I'm not running again, Emma said. I ran for 2 years and it didn't help anyone. 3 soldiers died anyway. 2 more disappeared, and Hadari is still hunting. Running doesn't solve this. It just delays it. Captain Hayes, I have patients in this hospital, Emma continued, her voice hardening. Corporal Jensen, who should be dead right now. Private Chen, who survived a blast that took everything from him. Ranger Torres, who's recovering from cardiac trauma. and 15 other military personnel who came here because they trusted this institution to keep them safe. If Hadari knows I'm here, then he might try something. But I'm not leaving them unprotected." Torres and Kim exchanged a look that suggested this was not going according to their planned script. "You're not thinking clearly," Torres said. "You're experiencing trauma response. You're not in a position to make tactical decisions." "Actually," Emma said calmly, "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 2 years. For the first time since Kandahar, I'm not running from who I am. I'm not hiding from my past. I'm standing in it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to put security protocols in place at this hospital. You're going to brief the staff about the threat. You're going to protect my patients. And I'm going to stay here and do what I do best, save lives." Kim stepped forward. "That's not your decision to make." "Then make me cooperate," Emma said. "Arrest me. Charge me with identity fraud. Take me into federal custody. But understand that if you do, every soldier in this hospital loses the one surgeon who can read combat trauma the way it needs to be read. The one person who understands how these injuries work because she's treated hundreds of them. You want me to testify about the Kandahar operation? You want me to help identify Hadari's network? Then you keep me here. You protect this hospital. And you let me do my job." The room went silent. Torres studied Emma's face, and in that moment, Emma could see the calculation happening. The weighing of federal protocol against tactical necessity. The assessment of whether this one woman was worth the risk. Before Torres could respond, the hospital's security alert system activated. Not a medical emergency. A security breach. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Lockdown initiated. Unidentified individual attempted unauthorized entry through the East Wing secure entrance. Security footage shows individual matching known associate of international fugitive Fahim Hadari. Repeat. Lockdown protocol activated. All non-essential personnel to secure areas. Medical personnel maintain position and continue patient care." Emma and the 2 FBI agents stood motionless for exactly 3 seconds. Then Emma moved toward the door. "He's here," she said simply. "And I'm not running." Reed Memorial Hospital transformed in minutes from a place of healing into a fortified compound under siege. The main entrance was sealed. Emergency protocols engaged. Doors locked with reinforced magnetic security. Armed hospital security personnel, supplemented by Virginia State Police who'd been stationed at the facility since the FBI arrived, took positions at strategic points throughout the building. Emma moved through the corridors with Torres and Kim flanking her, while uniformed officers worked to account for every staff member and patient. The emergency department was a study in controlled chaos. Patients in beds, patients in hallways, patients in waiting areas, all of them suddenly confined in a locked building with an active threat somewhere inside. "We're clearing the East Wing," Kim said into his radio. "Anyone mobile is being moved to secure areas. Medical procedures are being paused. Non-essential staff is being consolidated into the main cafeteria." Emma's mind was calculating in parallel tracks. Patient locations, medical vulnerabilities, where Hadari's network would move if they had operatives inside the building, where the security breach had occurred, how long it would take to systematically take down a hospital's defensive systems. She was heading toward the ICU when Dr. Holland intercepted her in the hallway. His face was pale, his expression cycling between confusion and something approaching awe. "You're really her," he said quietly. "Captain Miranda Hayes, the surgeon of Kandahar. I've read about you. Everyone in trauma surgery has read about you. 400 combat surgeries. 400. And you've been working as a trauma nurse in my department for 18 months? I was trying to forget," Emma said, moving past him toward the ICU. "I was trying to be someone who didn't have that weight." Holland grabbed her arm gently. "That person doesn't exist anymore. I understand that. But the woman standing in front of me right now, the one who saved Corporal Jensen, who guided me through Ranger Torres's cardiac trauma, who reads injury patterns like they're written in a language only you understand, that woman exists. And this hospital needs her right now." Before Emma could respond, an emergency alert sounded. Different from the medical codes, different from the security warnings. This was a facility-wide alarm. "Power failure in sectors 2 and 3, the overhead announcement reported. "Backup generators engaging. Repeat, backup generators engaging. All personnel remain in current secure areas. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. But in that moment of darkness, Emma understood something critical. He's not trying to get in, she said to Torres. He's already inside. He's trying to disable the security systems from within. Before Torres could respond, Emma heard a familiar voice calling from the ICU behind her. Captain Hayes? She turned to find Denise Park standing in the ICU doorway, her face a mixture of confusion and hurt. Denise. Emma started, but her colleague held up her hand. Don't, Denise said. Just don't. I heard them talking in the break room. The FBI agents. About who you are. About Kandahar. About the soldiers who are dead because of some classified mission you were part of. Emma approached slowly. Denise, I wanted to tell you. You lied to me for 18 months. Denise interrupted, her voice cracking. You made me your friend. You made me trust you. And the entire time you were hiding. You were running. And now there are people trying to kill you. And you're still not telling the truth about who you actually are. You want to know who I actually am? Emma said quietly. I'm a surgeon who saved people in war zones and felt like she'd failed them anyway. I'm a woman who was called a hero and believed it was a lie. I'm someone who faked her death because she couldn't live with the person she'd become. That's who I am, Denise. That's the truth. Denise's eyes filled with tears. Then why are you still here? Because this time, Emma said, I'm not running. I'm standing. Whatever comes next, I'm facing it. Captain Bradley Ross emerged from the ICU recovery room at that moment, moving carefully, his facial wounds still healing but his mind clear. When he saw Emma, he stood as straight as his injuries would allow and saluted. Ma'am, he said formally. Captain Olivia Hayes, correct? Just Emma, she said. With respect, ma'am, you'll always be Captain Hayes to everyone who served with you. Ross lowered his salute. I served under your command in Helmand Province, 2015. You operated on me when I had shrapnel in my leg, and 3 other soldiers on the table simultaneously. You saved my life, and 11 others that day. 11 people who are alive right now with families and kids, because you chose to keep working when you could have stopped. Ross, I appreciate that, but you told Denise you're not running anymore. Ross interrupted. You're standing, so stand with us. Whatever's happening in this hospital, whatever threat is here, you're not alone. We're here. All of us. Every soldier you saved, every life you kept alive. We're here. The lights flickered again. This time they stayed dark for longer. Backup generators failing. The overhead announcement crackled. Emergency lighting activated. Repeat. Emergency lighting activated. All personnel report immediately if you observe security breaches or unauthorized access in your area. In the darkness of the backup lighting, Emma understood that the siege had truly begun. The threat wasn't outside anymore. Hadari's network was inside the walls, systematically dismantling the hospital's defenses, moving toward something. Toward her. Toward leverage. Toward whatever endgame they'd planned. Torres appeared beside her. Weapon visible now. We're moving you to a secure area. No, Emma said, looking at Holland, at Denise, at Ross, at all the patients trapped in this hospital because of her past. We're protecting this facility. You want me alive? Then we make sure nothing gets through those corridors to the people who can't protect themselves. That's what I do. I protect. That's who I am. And as the emergency lights cast long shadows through the hospital hallways, Captain Miranda Hayes stopped running and started fighting. The hospital's surveillance center became Emma's command post. Security Chief Derek Hayes, no relation, had worked military security for 18 years, and he understood tactical thinking when he saw it. He'd been skeptical when Emma approached him, this woman who'd been exposed as a federal fugitive just hours earlier. But when she began walking through the hospital layout, predicting attack vectors with surgical precision, understanding security vulnerabilities the way someone who'd studied combat tactics would understand them, his skepticism shifted into respect. The East Wing has 3 access points, Emma said, pointing to the security monitors showing the hospital layout. Primary entrance is locked and monitored. Secondary stairwell has a card reader that was installed last year. Your lock database is digitized? Cloud-based system, Derek confirmed. Then the infiltrator will come through the secondary stairwell. They'll have cloned the access card from someone on staff, probably someone in housekeeping or maintenance, people with regular access who wouldn't trigger alerts. Torres watched from the corner of the room, impressed despite herself. This wasn't a nurse operating. This wasn't even a doctor. This was a tactical operative who'd spent years reading environments and predicting human movement under pressure. The ICU, Emma continued, has 37 patients. 15 of them are military personnel, which makes them the secondary targets. The primary target is me, but the infiltrator won't move directly. They'll establish position first, create leverage, use the patients as insurance. Before anyone could respond, Derek's radio crackled. Security Team 2 reporting suspicious activity in the East Wing secondary stairwell. Individual claiming to be patient transfer from Arlington Hospital. No paperwork. Says he's scheduled for orthopedic evaluation. Emma and Torres locked eyes. Move him to the conference room in the West Wing, Emma said immediately. Visible but controlled. Don't approach aggressively. Act like you believe his story. That's not protocol, Kim said. No, Emma agreed. But it's tactical. If he's the infiltrator, he'll move toward central authority. He'll want to establish his position. We let him think he's winning. The security team complied. On the monitors, they watched as hospital staff directed a man in his mid-30s. Middle Eastern features, nervous movements, a jacket loose enough to conceal a weapon, toward the West Wing conference room. Corporal Jensen emerged from his recovery room at that exact moment, drawn by the tactical discussion happening in the hallway near his ICU section. You're operating like someone with military training, Jensen said, watching Emma study the monitors. Not like a nurse, not like a doctor. You're thinking like an operator. Emma didn't deny it. There was no point in denial anymore. Captain Olivia Miranda Hayes, she said, her voice clear and steady. Special Operations Command. 6 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. 412 documented trauma surgeries. 4 Silver Star nominations, 3 of which I declined. And 1 very bad decision that ended my military career and got me hidden in this hospital for the last 2 years. Denise, who'd been standing silently in the hallway after her confrontation with Emma, stepped forward. That's not who I know. I know, Emma said, meeting her friend's eyes. The woman you knew was incomplete. She was running. The woman standing here now is the one you actually befriended, even though you didn't know her full name. Derek's radio sounded again. Subject is in the conference room. He's asking for medical clearance. He's becoming agitated. Says he needs to use the bathroom. Let him go to the bathroom, Emma said. But escort him with 2 officers in tactical position. Not visible, but close enough to respond. On the monitor, they watched as the infiltrator was escorted down the hallway. But 3 seconds before reaching the bathroom, he moved. His hand went to his jacket. He spun toward the nearest officer and reached for something. Torres's voice came through the radio, cold and authoritative. Armed subject, take him down, now. The officers responded with precision. The infiltrator was on the ground, restrained, a pistol visible on the floor where it had fallen from his jacket. Subject secured, Derek reported. No shots fired. Medical check? Bring him to interrogation, Torres said. Then she turned to Emma. That was predictive analysis. That was experience, Emma corrected. In Kandahar, you learn to read the moment when someone switches from pretense to action. The micro-expressions, the muscle tension, the specific angle of the shoulder that means they're about to reach for a weapon. I've read that moment hundreds of times. Holland, who'd been observing from the back of the security center, stepped forward. You weren't just a trauma surgeon, were you? I was both, Emma said. Combat medic, tactical operator, and surgeon. Those things don't exist separately in the field. They're the same skill set. Torres received a call. Her expression hardened. That's confirmed. Facial recognition identified the subject as Hassan Marwali, known associate of Fahim Hadari. He has a $2 million bounty on your head, Captain Hayes. Posted by Hadari personally. The reasoning provided was specifically for the humiliation of being saved by a woman. Your existence threatens his entire narrative. Emma absorbed this information with steady calm. Then we stop giving him the narrative he wants. She turned to address everyone gathered in the security center: Derek, Holland, Denise, Jensen, Torres, and the hospital security team. Fahim Hadari wants me to run. He wants me to disappear so he can chase me across the continent. He wants me to be prey. That's not going to happen. Emma's voice hardened with something primal, something that came from the part of her that had survived 8 years of war. I'm not hiding anymore. If he wants to find me, let him come. But he's going to find someone who's done running. He's going to find Captain Miranda Hayes, and every person in this hospital is going to remember why a Taliban commander is so desperate to kill her. Because I saved his life. Because I kept him alive when my country wanted him dead. And because he can't live with being indebted to a woman. The room went silent. On the monitor, Hassan Marwali sat in the interrogation room, handcuffed, defeated. Behind him in the hallway, armed FBI agents stood ready. Lock down the rest of the hospital, Emma said. Full protective protocols. Medical personnel maintain positions. Patients stay in secure areas. And get me every piece of intelligence you have on Hadari's network. If he's coming, I'm going to be ready. Torres made a decision. You're not a civilian witness anymore. You're a tactical consultant. Derek, give her full access to security systems. Captain Hayes, you have operational authority over this facility as of right now. Emma nodded. She'd spent 2 years running from the title. Now she was stepping into it. Captain Miranda Hayes was no longer invisible. The ICU was the stronghold. 23 patients, all of them vulnerable, all of them under Emma's protection now. She'd transformed from invisible nurse into tactical commander, and every person in that building understood what the shift meant. Dr. Holland, Emma said, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the security center. I need you on the medical floors. Prepare emergency procedures for trauma. If anyone gets wounded during what's about to happen, they go directly to you. Can you do that? Holland straightened. What do you need from me? Keep everyone alive, Emma said simply. While I end this. Torres had positioned her team in strategic locations throughout the ICU. Security cameras covered every entrance, but the real advantage was tactical positioning. Emma had placed officers in spaces where they could respond to threats without exposing patients. It was the kind of three-dimensional thinking that came from years of operating in environments where one wrong position meant casualties. The alert came at 18:47 hours. Security reporting movement in the ICU corridor. Multiple armed individuals, coordinated approach, breach protocol engaged. Emma moved with Torres and 3 tactical officers toward the ICU, her movements fluid and precise. This was different from anything Reed Memorial had trained for. This was urban combat translated into a medical environment. This was the person Captain Miranda Hayes had been, before she became Emma Garrett. The first corridor showed evidence of forced entry. Security doors damaged, electronic locks bypassed. Professional work, which meant professional operators. The ICU main entrance revealed the full situation. One armed infiltrator stood inside the unit, holding ICU nurse Sarah Mitchell against his chest, a knife pressed to her throat. The blade was steady. His hands were steady. This was someone trained for exactly this kind of scenario. Behind him, the other patients were visible in their beds, some trying to hide, some watching with the particular terror that came from warfare flashbacks triggered by real danger. Corporal Jensen was trying to move toward the infiltrator, despite his injuries. "Stand down," Emma called out, her voice carrying the authoritative calm of someone who'd given commands in worse situations. Then she continued in Pashto, the language flowing from her lips like she'd never stopped speaking it. "I am Captain Miranda Hayes. I know who you are. I know Hadari sent you. Let the nurse go, and we negotiate." The infiltrator's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected her to speak his language. He hadn't expected her to step forward with her hands visible, weapon holstered, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone making a non-threatening approach. "You know Hadari?" he said in Pashto, his accent placing him from the southern provinces. "I saved his life," Emma replied, continuing to move slowly forward. "In Kandahar. I was ordered to keep him alive. I did. I am responsible for his existence in this world. You want revenge for what happened to him? Then take me." "Let the nurse go," You have what you came for. Torres made a motion to one of the tactical officers. Emma held up her hand without looking. No, not yet. He wanted you, the infiltrator said. He wanted to send a message. But you're offering yourself? I'm offering the only thing that matters, Emma said, now close enough to see the details of the man's face. The desperation, the fear, the particular kind of devotion that came from years of military service. She recognized him in a way that had nothing to do with facial recognition. She recognized him because she'd been him once. A soldier convinced he was fighting for something righteous. My name is Omar, the infiltrator said, as if introducing himself mattered. Omar, Emma repeated, her voice gentle. Your hands are shaking. You have an old injury. I can see it in the way your left shoulder sits. Shrapnel wound? Afghan conflict? Omar's expression flickered. Surprised that she'd noticed. Surprised that she cared enough to look. 2012? He said quietly. IED. They said I was lucky, but the infection never fully cleared. It hurts when I hold things too long. Emma took another step forward. Let her go. Come with me to medical. I can help with that infection. It's treatable. Antibiotics. Maybe a small surgical intervention to remove the damaged tissue. I can make the pain stop. For a moment, Omar's grip on the knife loosened. For a moment, the professional infiltrator transformed into a wounded soldier, desperate for relief from chronic pain. For a moment, Emma's offer of medical care seemed more appealing than the mission Hadari had assigned him. Then Torres moved. The tactical officer struck from behind, weapon deployed, overwhelming force. Omar dropped the knife. Sarah was pulled to safety, and in the chaos of the takedown, Emma saw Omar's shoulder shift wrong, saw the old injury aggravated by the struggle, saw him wince with pain, even as he was being restrained. She moved immediately toward Sarah, assessing the knife wound on her neck. Shallow. Surface level. The blade hadn't penetrated deeply enough to damage critical vessels. I need sutures and antibiotics, Emma called out, her voice resuming its medical authority. Get her to treatment bay 3. Dr. Holland is standing by. Then she turned to Omar, who was being handcuffed, who was being read his rights, who was being treated like a captured terrorist rather than a wounded soldier. The infection, Emma said in Pashto. When we process you, tell them you need medical evaluation. Tell them Captain Hayes said the wound is critical. They'll listen. They'll treat you. You don't have to live in pain anymore. Omar looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude and resignation. He'd come to kill her or die trying. Instead, he was getting medical care from the very person who'd been his target. Torres approached Emma as Sarah was being wheeled toward Holland's waiting team. That was tactical negotiation. That was medicine, Emma corrected. Same thing, different context. The security perimeter was reinforced. The second infiltrator had been captured without incident. The siege was over. But the real battle, the one happening inside Captain Miranda Hayes, was just beginning, because she'd just realized something terrible and profound. She'd made a genuine offer of help to a man sent to kill her, and she'd meant it, every word, because the woman she'd become, the one who ran from war, the one who hid as a nurse, the one who refused to be a hero, that woman had never actually stopped being a healer. She'd just been healing the wrong things. The hospital stabilized by midnight. The second infiltrator was secured. FBI teams were cataloging evidence. The siege was over. Emma sat in a small office, waiting for the person she'd spent 2 years running from. Not a threat, but a ghost from her past who'd finally tracked her down. Colonel Sarah Voss entered at 0:23 hours. She was 54, with gray threading through dark hair pulled back with military precision. Her dress uniform bore insignia that suggested a career spent climbing ranks, making hard decisions, carrying weight. And when she saw Emma, her expression shifted into something that held both professional authority and genuine emotion. Miranda, Voss said, her voice controlled but not quite steady. I've been looking for you for 2 years. Emma stood. Ma'am. Don't ma'am me, Voss said, stepping forward and embracing her former subordinate. You're alive. That's all that matters right now. When they separated, Voss gestured for Emma to sit. They faced each other across a small table in the quiet office. 2 soldiers who'd served together in places where survival was measured in minutes and success in lives saved. You were awarded the Medal of Honor, Voss said without preamble. Posthumously, for your actions during the field hospital attack in Kandahar province. The army accepted that you'd died because there were no remains to recover. 8 medical personnel killed, 14 patients. You performed emergency surgical intervention on 42 personnel during the attack. You saved 6 soldiers. You lost everyone else. And you disappeared rather than accept recognition for it. Emma's hands were folded on the table in front of her. She didn't move them. I didn't save everyone, she said quietly. You saved everyone you could have saved, Voss replied, under incoming fire, with limited equipment. With simultaneous casualties arriving, Miranda, intelligence later declassified the attack parameters. It was coordinated, targeted specifically at you. Taliban operatives had mapped the field hospital layout. They knew exactly where you'd be. The attack was designed to kill you because you'd saved too many of our soldiers. Because you were too good at your job. Emma looked up. What? The attack wasn't random, Voss continued. You were the primary target. You survived because you refused to stop operating even under fire. You survived because the commanding officer on site ordered a full evacuation, and you refused to leave until every patient who could be moved was out of that tent. You survived because of who you are. And instead of recognizing that, you ran. For the first time since the siege began, Emma felt tears threatening. She blinked them back with military discipline. I couldn't live with the idea that I'd chosen, Emma said. That I'd prioritized. That I'd let people die because I was operating on someone else. You lived with the idea that you'd failed, Voss corrected. But you didn't fail. You did exactly what a combat surgeon does. You triaged. You worked in priority. You saved the maximum number of lives with the resources available. That's not failure. That's excellence under impossible circumstances. Before Emma could respond, Torres appeared in the doorway. You need to see something. They followed Torres through the quiet hospital corridors toward the ICU. And there, outside Emma's small office, stood a gathering that made Emma's breath catch. Captain Bradley Ross, Corporal Jensen, Ranger Michael Torres, Private Chen, Dr. Holland, Denise Park, the entire trauma team, every staff member who'd worked with Emma, every patient she'd saved, every person whose life had been touched by the woman named Emma Garrett or Captain Miranda Hayes. Ross stepped forward, saluted formally, and spoke with the voice of a soldier addressing his commanding officer. Captain Hayes, ma'am, we wanted to say thank you. The others began to clap. Slow, steady, building into something that sounded like recognition and respect, and the particular form of gratitude that only came from soldiers who understood what it meant to be saved by someone who refused to give up. Holland stepped forward next. His expression was complicated. Regret for doubting her, respect for her skills, understanding of the weight she'd been carrying. I owe you an apology, Holland said formally, for treating you as less than what you are, for not recognizing your expertise, for not understanding that the woman standing in my trauma bay was Captain Miranda Hayes, one of the most decorated combat surgeons in special operations history. I'm sorry, and I'm honored to work with you. Emma's composure, which had held through 2 years of hiding and 1 day of siege, cracked completely. Tears rolled down her face as she looked at the gathered crowd of people whose lives had been touched by her skill, her dedication, her refusal to stop saving people even when she believed she'd failed. Voss stepped beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. This is who you are, Voss said quietly. Not a failure. Not a ghost. Not someone running from her past. You're a healer. You're a soldier. You're a woman who keeps fighting when everyone else stops. That's Captain Miranda Hayes. And this hospital finally sees it. As the gathered crowd continued their acknowledgement, Emma realized something she'd been running from for 2 years. Forgiveness didn't come from the army. It didn't come from medals or official recognition. It came from the people whose lives you'd saved. From colleagues who saw your skill. From patients who understood you'd given everything to keep them alive. She'd spent 2 years looking for forgiveness in silence. Maybe it had been waiting for her invisibility all along. The choice was supposed to be simple: return to active military service with full rank and honors restored, or continue civilian life as Dr. Olivia Hayes, openly recognized, no longer hiding. Torres presented the options clinically. Voss presented them with understanding. Both women waited for Emma to decide who she would become next. Emma sat in the hospital chapel at 0300 hours, alone with the question that had defined her entire life: the person who saved lives in war zones, or the person who hid from that identity? The soldier or the healer? The woman who'd spent 8 years operating under fire, or the nurse who'd spent 2 years pretending that woman didn't exist? Colonel Voss found her there. "The Taliban commander is still at large," Voss said without preamble. "Fahim Hadari escaped CIA custody and disappeared. We have intelligence suggesting he's planning to resurface in the region within the next 6 months. If you return to civilian life, you're a target, permanently, constantly, living as a hunted person." Emma looked at her commanding officer. "What if I don't return to the battlefield?" "Explain," Voss said, sitting down beside her. "I can't go back to combat deployments," Emma continued. "I can't carry that weight again. But I can do something else. I can train the next generation. Combat casualty care protocols, field medicine. The techniques I learned and perfected, all of it. I can make sure the soldiers who come after me are better prepared than I was. Fewer of them die. More of them come home. That's how I save lives now." Voss studied Emma's face. Then she smiled. "Department of Defense has been developing a comprehensive trauma training program. They want experienced combat surgeons to consult. They've specifically requested you. Colonel rank, teaching position at Walter Reed Medical Center, full military benefits reinstated, and complete operational autonomy. You'd report directly to me." "Then I'm going," Emma said. 6 months later, Emma stood in dress uniform at Walter Reed Medical Center, her rank insignia catching the light. Colonel Olivia Miranda Hayes, Special Operations Medical Command. 23 residents and attending physicians filled the simulation lab. Behind her, trauma scenarios played across multiple screens. Mannequins were arranged in mass casualty configurations. On the wall, framed photographs showed soldiers she'd saved. On another wall, photographs of soldiers she'd lost. Both were part of the teaching. "Combat medicine and civilian trauma care share fundamental principles," Emma began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived the information she was teaching. "But they diverge in critical ways. Today we're covering tactical casualty care protocols adapted for emergency departments." In the front row, Captain Bradley Ross sat taking meticulous notes. He'd left the field and entered medical school specifically to learn from Emma. He wanted to be what she'd been, the person who made impossible things possible. Beside him, Corporal Jensen sat in uniform, still active duty, but volunteering for every training session Emma offered. He'd survived because she'd recognized a pattern. Now he wanted to learn to recognize patterns himself. Dr. Holland stood in the back observing, no longer the attending physician supervising from above. Now he was a colleague learning from someone whose expertise had been forged in the hardest classroom imaginable. Denise Park sat at a small desk in the corner, coordinating the logistics of the training program, bridging the gap between Emma's military and civilian work. She'd forgiven the lies because she understood now that they'd never been about deception. They'd been about survival. After the training session ended, a junior medical officer approached hesitantly. "Colonel Hayes, I'm prior military, Army medic. I've been worried my background would be a disadvantage in civilian medicine." Emma met his eyes directly. "Your background is your strength. The question is whether you're ready to stop hiding it and start using it. Medical skills aren't diminished by combat experience. They're refined by it. Own it." As the simulation lab emptied, Emma's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from military intelligence. A disaster zone. A massive earthquake in a region with limited medical infrastructure. Multiple casualties. A request for experienced trauma surgeons. She read it twice, then forwarded the message to Voss. "I'm volunteering." The response came within minutes. "Request approved. Transport departing 0600 hours. Welcome back to the fight, Captain." At 0545 hours, Emma changed into flight suit and tactical gear. Her hands moved through the familiar motions of preparation with muscle memory that never faded. This was who she was. Not hiding, Not running. Not pretending to be less than what she'd become. This was Captain Miranda Hayes. Doctor. Soldier. The woman who refused to give up. She boarded the military transport with 5 other medical personnel. As the engines engaged and the aircraft lifted off, Emma looked down at the world below. At Walter Reed fading into the distance. At the training program she'd built. At the physicians she'd taught. At the lives that would be saved because she'd finally stopped running from who she was. Voss approached her in the transport cabin and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You know what they're calling you in the intelligence community?" Voss said. "The surgeon of Kandahar." They never stopped. "And now, finally, you're not running from that name." Emma looked at her commanding officer and smiled. "I'm not running anymore." As the transport carried her toward the disaster zone, toward soldiers who needed saving, toward the work that had always defined her, Captain Olivia Miranda Hayes understood something fundamental. The question had never been about who she wanted to become. It had always been about accepting who she'd always been. Not a ghost. Not a failure. Not someone hiding in plain sight. Just a doctor. Just a soldier. Just a woman who would never stop fighting for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. Final image. The military aircraft against the pre-dawn sky, carrying Captain Hayes toward her next mission. No longer invisible. Finally at peace.